Secretary of State, thank you for coming in today. Whose idea was it to separate the defence part of the NSCR and take that away and have a go at it on its own?
It was a collective decision that was arrived at by the National Security Council.
Right. And could you just explain, if we can explore that a little bit more, could you explain how we sort of doctrinally split, security and defence? If defence isn't there for national security, what is it there for? Yeah. And therefore, sort of, what is the ambition for it? What does it actually mean to the defence community in this country to split that out of that review?
Well, I think going back to the Chairman's earlier points is that through the NSCR, an element of a straitjacket had been created through the NSCR. So it was felt and the body of, because the defence threats have changed so rapid or escalating so rapidly since 2015, we needed to have the opportunity to look at that separately, and not wishing to hold up the very important work that the NSCR had been doing across another 11 different areas. We felt that it was important just to create that separation. It's been made quite clear, and I made it clear in the statement to the House, that this isn't a modernising defence programme, isn't a fiscally neutral programme, which was, if it had remained within the National Security and Capability Review, that had to be fiscally neutral. So I think collectively we felt this was the right decision to make.
Okay, so why didn't they just take the brakes off making it fiscally neutral and say, actually, national security, which we're being encouraged to look at in the round? So we now talk about spending on CT, and we talk about spending on cyber. In the same breath, we're talking about deterrence in sort of regular forces and so on. It's just quite hard to understand, again, doctrinally, how you separate defence and national security. If defence isn't there as part of national security, what is it there for?
Yeah. So much of the work has already sort of progressed very well in terms of a National Security and Capability Review, and that's very much what
you needed more time, basically.
And we just needed more time, because actually, in terms of some of the challenges that we're facing in defence going forward, they're pretty big challenges, and the field of warfare is shifting quite rapidly in terms of what other competitor nations are doing, is moving very, very rapidly. But the NSCR is very much informing what we actually do in terms of a modernising defence programme. So the work that we've done, and before, a lot of very important work was done by my predecessor, the Ministry of Defence, as well as the National Security Advisor and the National Security Council. And we're very much taking that and just being able to have the opportunity and the time to be able to do some more work ourselves. And I do actually think this is quite an important point, and it's easy to ignore. Since 2010, we've not had a look in terms of done a defence review or a programme like this, which has actually been led by the Ministry of Defence. It's been something that has been led by the Cabinet Office. And when we're talking about defence, I think it's very important for that to be led by defence. So that's something that was really important for me when we were discussing about doing this, that this is a defence-led programme, and we have the opportunity to bring in a lot of stakeholders, whether that is members of this House and the other House, but also working very closely with our allies, and I'll be sending a team out to the United States to work with them to learn some of the lessons of what they've been doing.
Okay, great. So that's what I was hoping to sort of tease out of you. There is a sort of cross-pollination between what you're doing in that NSCR into modernising defence, and we will then be presented with a vision of what national security and defence looks like for perhaps the next 10 or 15 years that we can really get behind and sell. And you're confident that will be the outcome of that process?
Yes, and one of the concerns and one of the constraints that we'd found ourselves in is that sometimes if you rush a decision, it is very easy to make the wrong decision. I also have come to learn that it's very easy to delete a capability, but it takes an awful long time to rebuild that capability, that learning, that knowledge, and often that equipment back into your armoury. And I would rather be accused of taking too long to reach the right decision than reach the wrong decision.
And just finally on this point, you talked about, second to last actually, you talked about consulting externally, you talked about America. Who else are you going to sort of speak with as we try and perhaps work within alliances and fit our jigsaw into the sort of global NATO forces or whatever that may be? Which other countries, is it France, or building on Lancaster House and things like that?
So what we'll be doing is we've already risen to all of our closest partners, the defence ministers. We very much welcome them to make contributions and thoughts as to about how best we go forward on this. We'll be looking at doing round tables for think tanks. We'll be wanting to make sure that we have a very clear open process to colleagues for them to be able to contribute. We want to get this right, and we are not arrogant in the belief that we have all the best ideas. We want to hear other people's ideas and make sure that they're part of the programme.
And just finally, if I can, because obviously this process now is becoming quite elongated for the families, for those who have read that capabilities are going and so on, and all the sort of stories in the newspapers and so on. When are we going to start having something deliverable or announceable, at least announceable with a direction of travel? Are you looking to announce anything about the NATO summit? Before summer recess. So the NATO summit on the 11th and 12th?
I think that would be a very good guiding point.
Excellent. Thank you. If I can just pick up very briefly on a couple of things you said. Firstly, General Poffrey, I mean, do you understand the contrast that it presents to your average service man or woman? That actually their quality of life is going to be so impeded by these little, and I accept they are little issues around authorisation of telephones, around hire cars and so on. But if we are looking at being very, very careful about our budget, do you see how that plays to your average serviceman or woman, that quality of life can be affected by increased costs in the submarine programme?
I think it is inevitable that people inside the structure will take different views about the merits of investing in one part of the programme versus another. And I think it is absolutely the case that we need to be vigilant to the detrimental effect, particularly to servicemen and women's morale, when you're taking small incremental hits on what they perceive as their quality of life, or the mechanism by which they were sort of the covenant that they sort of signed into when they joined the forces. But again, there is a little bit of expectation on the other side of that calculation. There's a little bit of expectation management for us to do with our people to make sure they're not doing things that are just don't pass what, you know.
Absolutely, but there will be some of these costs that are outside of your control, such as, you know, the world markets to do with minerals and so on, and stuff that's used in submarines. Is it really fair that those markets should really dictate, we're that close to the bone, should dictate the quality of life of our service personnel when we are already struggling to sort of retain these individuals within service?
Yes, and at risk of sounding too corporate on this, the reality of life is fairness is not the issue. It's about where's the best spread of our resources to deliver an output.
And
we
so
are conscious that when you do make a detrimental effect to people's morale, that is going to manifest itself potentially in retention rates and morale.
Absolutely. And therefore that then gets to the crux of my point, which is that talking about people are our finest asset is clearly not the case.
I think it is without question the view of everybody inside the military and indeed the MOD that people are the discriminator. I can't comment on outside government.
Okay. So just briefly, and Secretary of State, you made a very interesting point about the Prime Minister and Chancellor committed to you that up until we get to this modernising defence review, there's going to be no reduction in our capabilities, and we're going to sort of press pause, and you're going to be all right until then. Is that going to mean money?
In our discussions, it was absolutely clear that they didn't want any changes in capability. we'll have to have discussions in order to make sure that we have the right resources in order to be able to preserve and keep that capability mix as it is. So that will be part of our discussions. That's going to have to be paid
for, isn't it?
It's going to be part of our discussions, and I'm sure you would appreciate, don't want to sort of jeopardise any discussions that we have. But everyone was absolutely clear that we want to make the right decisions, we want to make sure that we've got the right armed forces going forward, and actually we don't want to be going down a route of making changes in terms of our capability that would end up being retrograde steps. There'd end up being mistakes, and that it would end up costing us more to put them back into the system. So we're going to have some discussions across government to make sure that over the coming year we have the ability to ensure that we can deliver and keep all those capabilities as they are until the Modernising Defence Programme has looked at it all, and we have a clear idea as to how we're to be investing money going forward.
To be absolutely clear, that requires more money in year now to meet those capabilities until the Modernising Defence Review has reported, correct?
Yes, we will need more support.
Thank you. So to say, I am privileged to represent the city of Plymouth. Now, in 2013, the Ministry of Defence allocated Plymouth as a centre of excellence for amphibious warfare in the United Kingdom. You are obviously not going to comment on stuff that has been leaked out of the department and so on about the review. However, could you just briefly outline to the committee your vision for amphibious warfare for this island nation going forward post the National Security Review?
So the department and all the armed forces have actually always been clear that we need to have amphibiosity as part of what we do, and you've seen our ability to use amphibious ships repeatedly play an important role in our Navy. We've got HMS Albion, who is currently being deployed, and we put a great value on that. Will the nature and how we have amphibious vessels change in the future? Without a shadow of a doubt, and it's interesting to look at other nations as to how they've developed their amphibious vessels. Do we need to have the ability to have amphibious vessels? Yes, we do. Will they be different to the ones in future to what we currently have? I would say almost certainly they probably will be different. But yes, we do need to have the ability to...
So forgive me, time is short. So can you confirm that when every other nation is expanding its amphibious capability, our capability may change, but actually it has a bright future in this country, and that is going to be centred on Plymouth?
Well, I'm not going to prejudge the Modernising Defence Programme, but it is absolutely clear that we need to have amphibious capability.
Secretary of State, finally from me today.
You can smile.
Yeah. Look, I know you. I know you as an individual before you got this job. I know that you have a deep commitment to our armed forces personnel. Successive prime ministers in this country have had a deep commitment to our armed forces personnel. But as we've seen today, the gap between that and what that actually feels like to serve is sometimes far too wide. What would you say to an individual who joined the army as a young man, who fought in 2003 in Iraq, who went into an extremely chaotic operation, poorly resourced, poorly funded, poorly planned, and did his best, okay, was involved in incidents that were way beyond his control, who has now, some 15 years later, just been asked to start his 8th investigation into an incident in Iraq, and is sitting in this room today? What would you say to him about your commitment as Secretary of State to Defence?
Well, anyone who is in a situation where they seem to have been through a process at 8 times, I'm not sure as to why that should have occurred, and it's certainly not the way to treat anyone, and you wouldn't want anyone to be through that continuous stress. So if it is possible to have the individual's details, I'll very happily look as to why that has occurred. We've ISI, for example, was very much set up to ensure that complaints are and issues are dealt with, but I don't think that we want to be putting any of our armed forces through that constant treadmill of where they're having inquiry or investigation after investigation. But I'd be very happy to look at a particular incident.
None of us want to see that. None of us want to see that. But you know as well as I do, that process has taken place since 2003. Through the Iraq process,
yes,
through the Afghanistan process, into Northern Ireland. What are you going to do differently that your predecessors have not done? Firstly, do you think that is a fair way to treat those who have signed up to the military and served their country? Fair. And what are you going to do differently to stop this current sort of cancer of historical allegations?
Yeah. Well, what we're very keen to do is to actually look at, how we... Firstly, if people do something that is fundamentally very, very, very wrong, there has to be an accountability process,
and
which
everyone
absolutely accepts that. But what we also have to do is, and we've seen a lot of vexatious and frankly malicious claims that have occurred, and frankly smeared innocent people who have been out in, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan, serving their country, doing a job that frankly most people would never want to do. So am I content that that has happened? No, I'm not. How do we avoid it going forward? I'm very happy to look at different ways to ensure that we have a process that, if we can have, if there are complaints or investigations that are looked at swiftly and clearly, and we give people an answer to them, but make sure that there isn't this situation where they're going on this constant treadmill, where they're getting refused, investigated again and again. I'm very happy to look at ideas and how we can have processes within the MOD to ensure people don't do that. Obviously, within the rule of the law, I think on the ISI process, it was something that was forced on us.
I'm happy with the detail. Sorry, Peter, I am happy with the detail, and we're short on time. The IFI process is the one you're talking about. But you, as an individual, as an elected politician, Secretary of State Gavin Williamson, do you think it is fair that after 14 years, someone should be investigated for the 8th time for the same offence?
Well, I think I've already said to you that it's not right that someone has to go through an investigation 8 times. It doesn't seem to be logical. It doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. That's why I'd be very happy, if there is anything within my gift to do to help, very happy to do it. But in terms of the wider issue that you touched upon, in terms of how can you change things going forward, do we actually have the right processes to make sure that that doesn't occur in future conflicts? That's something I'm very keen, very happy to look at. If we do need to change the way we do things, very happy to do so, because it is about the impact in terms of morale, the impact in terms of people's lives will be absolutely devastating, and that is not something that I, as Secretary of State, want to see happen, nor will tolerate. And if there's things that I can do to improve that, I'm very happy to look at every single option about how we can improve that.
Thank you very much.